With the latest coming in from the White House, where the US President Joe Biden is hosting the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Let's now go straight across to our executive editor, Palki Sharma Upadhyay, who is in Washington, D.C., is getting us a better sense of what the expectations are from this all-important, crucial bilateral meeting between the two leaders of the world's biggest democracies. Palki, where you are right now, we can see the White House in the backdrop, which is currently hosting those two leaders. A lot of expectations from that meeting. First, let's talk about the camaraderie that was fully on display during those remarks that were delivered by the two leaders just a short while back.
Right, the camaraderie was for the cameras to see. It's been captured well. You've seen the handshakes, you've seen the backslapping. Clearly, it was an easy equation. We have been telling our viewers over the past couple of days that this is not the first time that these two leaders are engaging with each other. 7 years back in 2014, when Prime Minister Modi came here, Joe Biden hosted him. Joe Biden is a career politician. He's been in the business for, 5 decades now. He knows how to work with all sides. And India is a very, very, very important partner for America. I can't underline that enough. So it only makes sense for the US to roll out the red carpet. So the vice president on one day, the president on the second day, they're meeting, they're greeting, they're hosting. They want very much to work with India. Very interestingly, apart from all the things that everyone spoke about that will come up, the regular issues were brought up: Afghanistan, climate change, terrorism, China. I'm assuming that's not something that they spelled out. They talked about Gandhi. They talked about non-violence. They talked about something very important: the trusteeship of the planet. That you need to take ownership of where your world is going, and you need to take the lead and fix the things that need to be fixed. That's a very important dimension. So what you see here is India talking to America as another world leader and trying to shape the course of not just this relationship, but what impact and what bearing it has on the rest of the world. So all in all, looked like a very productive and constructive meeting to me. From the optics were great, I have to say.
Indeed, and the two leaders also interestingly going off script and sharing anecdotes and exchanging very warm handshakes. Palki, let's talk about the timing of this meeting, specifically for the American president. This comes right after the Afghanistan debacle. His approval ratings are not looking very good. How important is this meeting for the United States at this point, and where does the relationship between the US and India stand at this point?
The India-US relationship, let me take that one first. The India-US relationship is perhaps in its best phase it has ever been. And when I say ever, I mean ever since India's independence. There was a lot of back and forth, a little bit of mistrust with India being non-aligned, but swaying largely to the Soviet Union as it became a defense partner of India, and it became a partner on very many levels. The India relationship with the US actually got going only in the last 2 decades in a very serious manner. And it was only about a decade ago that America described India as a very important, comprehensive, strategic partner. At this point, I have argued that this relationship and this meeting is more important for Joe Biden than it is for Narendra Modi. And I will tell you why. Joe Biden has been in office only for 7 months now, and he's already an embattled president. You mentioned the dropping ratings. Well, ratings will go up and down. He will remain president for the next 4 years. But look at what he faces both at home and outside. He is being called a reliable, unreliable ally. Well, Donald Trump was a new low for America, but Joe Biden has not done very much to fix that image. Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan was seen as one of the biggest botch-ups that America has been able to engineer. Joe Biden ditched France and went ahead with that nuclear submarine deal with the Australians, and the French said that this was a stab in the back, and France is their oldest ally. Joe Biden is facing the growing COVID cases in America. It is undeniable. They may not want to talk about it. Their press may not want to highlight it very much beyond a few stories here and there. But that's a fact that they cannot dismiss, that their hospitals are full of people. Vaccine hesitancy is a serious issue. Americans don't want to wear masks. We've been seeing it here. It feels like, well, mask is just another accessory here in the US. Some people put it on, others don't. There are no rules, there are no strict, it's a political issue, and that's something that the president will have to address if he wants to get rid of the pandemic. There are migrants lining up from Haiti at the border, and there are border patrol forces whipping them. That makes for very, very bad press, to say the least. And then you have the debt crisis. If they don't fix it next month, as soon as next month, they will face a cash crunch. They may not be able to pay salaries of their soldiers overseas. So, you see, he has a whole range of issues that are not going right for him. And then comes the Indian Prime Minister. This is a relationship that they value. Both Republicans and Democrats agree that India is a very important partner, and this gives some breathing room for the US administration and for the US government. So for Joe Biden, this meeting was very important. This meeting is an attempt to burnish America's multilateral credentials. It's an attempt to show that America remains a reliable partner and is not shy of putting its weight behind countries and allies that it deems important in its scheme of things. And right now, Joe Biden's focus is the East, it is China, and they would like to see India as an effective and solid and reliable counterweight to China. I'm not sure that's a role that India signed up for, but that's what the Americans want.
Right, Palki, even in that tweet put out by the US president shortly before he met the Indian Prime Minister, a free and open Indo-Pacific finding a mention that in itself tells us the significance that the United States attaches to that shared vision, which brings us to the Quad Summit, where the leaders would hope to arrive at further boosting that partnership when it comes to dealing with the Beijing threat. Like we've mentioned all along, they've not named China per se, but the indications have definitely been in that direction. Talking about the backdrop of the AUKUS ruckus, as it's been called, the US president has sought to reassure his allies that that partnership will not impact the other partnerships, like the Quad. To what extent is that satisfactory, and should India be concerned when it comes to the AUKUS alliance?
Not immediately. I don't think India should be concerned. In fact, India should welcome this alliance at this moment, because this takes the pressure off India and it takes the pressure off Quad to become a military alliance. And that's something that India was wary of, and for good reasons. You could accuse India of being hesitant in walking into this relationship, but India has its reasons. China is a very, very important economic partner for India. We want to contain that, but it's not going to happen overnight. You can't deny the fact that there is a huge volume of trade between the two countries, and fixing it can only be a gradual process at best. India shares a border with China that has been volatile for the past few months. So India cannot, just for the sake of showing that it stands up for something, enter into a rash or a not very well thought out arrangement. So India would not have wanted a very, very overt military dimension to this alliance. So it works very well for India that pressure has been taken off by AUKUS. AUKUS is very clearly and very obviously only about military containment of China. These nuclear warships are going to patrol those troubled waters, and they are going to try and keep China in check. What will the Quad do in the meantime? The Quad is going to focus on vaccines. 1 billion vaccines. It's a huge deal. Remember, countries in the region are largely reliant on China for vaccines. That's because they did not have alternatives. Who was giving them vaccines? Pfizer was not, Moderna was not, AstraZeneca was not. All of these countries were looking inwards, and China went out and gave them all these vaccines. Whether they work or not is different, but for any leader, he or she has to tell their people that, look, I've got the vaccines. This is the best I could get, but you have something. Now, if Quad nations come together and give an alternative, that's a very good way to build a relationship with the region. The second is 5G technology and semiconductors. They have a huge strategic significance. You see what the chip shortage has done to the global smartphone industry, to car manufacturers. This has a bearing on practically every kind of business at the moment. And there are serious security concerns over Huawei and 5G technology that China is exporting. But again, they have a monopoly. So does the world have an alternative? You can tell countries to not buy Huawei, but what are you giving them in return? So this is an attempt to create those alternatives, to create alternative supply chains, to work together on climate change, to work together on infrastructure projects. Countries are under debt because Chinese are coming and building things. But they want roads, they want rail networks, they want airports. If you tell them don't take Chinese money, what are you offering in return? So now the Quad is coming together, and hopefully they will put their money where their mouth is and look at investments. So all of these things are also ways to indirectly contain China. So I think the Quad, if pursued in the right direction, this is a start and a very important start, if pursued, could deliver the goods in due course.
Right, and talking about the Afghanistan crisis specifically, Palki, what would India's priorities be? Because this is a crisis that directly has security implications for the entire region, particularly for India.
And there's no denying the fact that this is also a crisis that, to a very large extent, is of America's making. And this is not something that I have been able to gather so far, whether to what extent the Afghanistan situation was discussed in the bilateral meeting. I'm not sure Afghanistan is the focus of the Quad beyond the regular reference to terrorism and how the world should do things to counter terrorism. I am really not sure how much they will stress on Afghanistan. But for India, it's very, very important. And we can only hope that the Indian leadership stresses on this and says that while Quad members are working to contain one threat in the region, they cannot really overlook the other threat that emanates from another Indian neighbor that China is working very closely with. So it's all interlinked at the end of the day, and it would do well for all world leaders and Quad leaders to focus on what's happening in Afghanistan. It cannot just yet be a footnote in diplomatic discussions. It has to be in the front and center of their agendas, and it has to be addressed sooner rather than later, because this is still an evolving situation. But you see the daily statements from the Taliban, and they're not very encouraging. They're saying that the world has to mind its own business. They want an invite at the UNGA to vote. So the Taliban see it as their moment, and they will not stop unless somebody puts some kind of pressure, and that pressure has to come from world leaders. So the Quad should ideally stress on Afghanistan and the repercussions of the American withdrawal. I'm not sure how much they're going to do it eventually.
And when it comes to finding common ground on the climate change issue, that's also something that the American president highlighted in his tweet before that meeting. What have you gathered so far on the shared vision on part of the two countries when it comes to dealing with this threat? And if at all, any deliverables on that front or any concrete timelines further than the ones that have been set out already are expected?
Climate change, like vaccines, may appear to be only a diplomatic conversation point, but it's actually a very, very, very important point again. India's climate change record is better than most countries. India has delivered on a lot of its commitments. India has achieved 21% of its pledge, which is saying a lot. Compare it to the developed world, and they've not been able to do very much. Since the Paris Climate Accord of 2016, we had a disruption called Donald Trump. He pulled out of that deal. The developed world will have to do its bit if climate change has to be arrested. And the entire world, including these two Quad members, Australia and the US, have been the direct sufferers of the consequences of climate change. You see wildfires, you see hurricanes, you see storms, you see a lot of devastation. Last month there were floods in this part of the US, and this is all a result of climate change. This is in progress, this devastation, and it is incumbent on world leaders to stop it. India's record has been exemplary. India has been leading. Yesterday, the Prime Minister also met one of the CEOs to look at sustainable technology and development strategies. So that's something that India remains very committed to. In the 2019 UNGA, the subject was Sustainable Development Goals, and that's something that the Prime Minister took a lead in. And I'm assuming that India will push that point that the developed world needs to do its bit if climate change has to be effectively countered.
Right. Palki, we've also been tracking the reactions coming in from the bilaterals that were held earlier with the Japanese counterpart, the Australian counterpart. What is the largest sense that you've gotten so far about the key takeaways from those engagements that, of course, were aimed at finding common ground before the Quad summit?
See, these meetings come, Molly, after almost 2 years. 2 years you've seen a hiatus that has been forced upon the world. There was no travel, there were no in-person meetings, and while virtual meetings are all good and fine, nothing matches meeting in person. You saw the pictures today from the White House, the handshakes. There is a lot that is called non-verbal communication, and that's also very important when you're trying to press a point. So I'm assuming that these meetings were basically to take the conversations from where they were left. Both Australia and Japan are important partners for India. They're not just Quad members. India shares a very robust bilateral relationship with each one of them. The development partnership with Japan, the strategic partnership with Australia, the fact that they're looking at a free trade agreement, the fact that Australia has finally been made part of the Malabar drills and exercises that India conducts annually. So all of these things were important. Yesterday we had a briefing by the Foreign Secretary post most of these meetings, and we were told that these were very constructive engagements, very important conversations, and I think this was also a way to set the ground for what is going to happen in the Quad Summit. So while everyone understands that China is a common adversary, everybody's specific issues are different. For India, Chinese threats come at the border. For India, Chinese threats come in the form of the trade imbalance, in the form of the technology that China is pushing into India. India does not have very many stakes in the South China Sea, but India has assets to protect and interests to protect in the Indian Ocean. But for Japan, it is the East China Sea. So while their specific issues may be different, their larger aim is to contain an expansionist China. So it helps when leaders meet each other first and then go to the talking table and come with a common agenda. So I'm sure that those were basically about rebooting the relationship and preparing for the Quad that is going to happen today.
Right. Palki, the Indian Prime Minister also earlier met the American Vice President Kamala Harris. The first time the two were meeting, Kamala Harris spoke about Pakistan and the issue of cross-border terrorism. Meanwhile, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken was hosting the Pakistani Foreign Minister in New York and appreciated Islamabad for its assistance in Afghanistan. Safe to say that America's convenient stance, if I may, on Pakistan continues.
That is true, and you can look at it from both ways. If you look at it from India's point of view, this is absolutely unacceptable, and this is a dangerous policy that that the US has pursued for 7 decades, and they should have learned some lessons after what happened in Afghanistan. Pakistan was clearly the architect of the fall of Kabul. Pakistan clearly supported the Taliban. The Pakistani military was very much part of the Taliban's offensive. And yet the Americans see Pakistan as a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. So there's something really wrong with their approach. And India should be raising this. But we also understand that this is how foreign policy works. This is how geopolitics works. All countries, all leaders focus on safeguarding their interests first. So from India's point of view, the good part is that it's been 7 months Joe Biden has been in office. He's still not called Imran Khan, but you have the president and the vice president of the US receiving the Indian prime minister. You see the difference in their approach, and you see how they treat the two allies very, very differently. While the Prime Minister and the President are meeting the Indian leadership, they have sent only their foreign minister to meet Shah Mahmood Qureshi, who is parked in New York. So there is clearly a difference for America. There's no comparison, frankly. India is a very, very important partner. Pakistan is someone that they want to keep in their fold because A, they don't want China to have all the leverage, and B, Pakistan is their route to this region and has been their partner in this war on terror. And perhaps in their calculations and scheme of things, it is going to be more costly to dump Pakistan at the moment. So there is a fair bit of there's a widening gap, I should say, and the channels of communication are still open, but the Pakistanis would certainly want a lot more from the US. Having said that, it looks very bad when you are, we are told that Kamala Harris was the one who raised the issue of Pakistan. She's the one who brought it up first. and then the conversation flowed from there. So on the same day, when you have the Vice President saying that Pakistan should be held accountable, and when you have the Foreign Minister saying something very different, it does not reflect very well on the US, and maybe they need to reassess their relationship with Pakistan, as Antony Blinken told the US Congress not very long ago.
Indeed. Palki, the White House, before these interactions began between the American president and the Indian Prime Minister, in a briefing, the White House said that post the Quad summit, we do expect an announcement on supply chains. The issue of supply chain resilience has been a very important one, particularly for India, given the disruptions overall thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's correct, and China controls these supply chains, and we've seen the impact of some of these disruptions in the last 1 year because of lockdowns. We saw what the world could suffer. Here in the US, it may not sound like a very important story, but for people, it was unthinkable that you go to a restaurant, you don't find ketchup. Why don't you find ketchup? Because those supply chains have been disrupted. The ketchup probably came from somewhere in Germany or some places in China. So, these are things that affect people's daily lives, and they don't. When you pick up things, you don't always think of where it has come from and who supplied it and who's delivering it to you. But if there is a disruption, that becomes a huge issue. So supply chains are very important, and they are now a very important strategic aspect in how the world sees things. The other important thing to note here, Molly, is the fact that this region, the Indo-Pacific, is becoming a very important hub for those supplies. So 41%, if I'm not wrong, 41% of the world's exports go through this region, go through this area, and who controls these waterways will be the one controlling the money and controlling the flow, and can shut off those taps if needed, and use and weaponize these supply chains. So China is very much in a position to weaponize supply chains, and it's important to create alternatives. Again, I keep saying that it's all very well to say don't depend on China, but then what do you do? So creating alternatives is going to take time. It may sound like a less dramatic headline, but it is, I think, the right course with lesser collateral damage. Picking up a fight is very easy. Lining up your ships and your missiles is the easier option. Constructing something and creating alternatives and not forcing the world to choose between China and the West or China and the Quad is the more difficult path. And if the Quad can sustain itself on this path, then it would be a service, not just to the 4 members, but to others as well. So supply chain is very, very, very important again.
Indeed. Our executive editor, Palki Sharma Upadhyay, joining us from our Washington, D.C. studios overlooking the White House, where the Indian Prime Minister and the US President are meeting. Thanks very much for the moment, Palki.